Hi everyone, it's Dr. A, and in this video, I'll be providing an overview of the organizational structure of the nervous system. One of the first things we'll start off with is discussing the two primary divisions of the nervous system, which includes the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And the central nervous system is of course made up of or by the brain and spinal cord, while the peripheral nervous system essentially includes everything else. So the phrase we can use here to represent everything else is peripheral nerves. And by this term, we're essentially referencing the nerves that extend from the spinal cord. Now, one thing that we haven't covered yet, which is also something you're probably very familiar with, are cranial nerves. And the question that I'll pose here is, where should we place cranial nerves? Should they be a part of the central nervous system or a part of the peripheral nervous system? If you're thinking peripheral nervous system, you'd be right. And the reason we place them here is because although cranial nerves originate or start within the brain, many of them extend beyond the brain. So now that we've talked about the two major divisions of the nervous system, let's talk about two other nervous system components. The first one we'll talk about here is the somatic nervous system. And if we take a look at the prefix of somatic, we'll see the word soma, S-O-M-A. And the word soma means body. So with this in mind, we can make note of the fact that the somatic nervous system is all about control of the body, specifically voluntary control. And when we think of the term voluntary, of course, we're talking about movements that we decide to do or perform. Now, as it pertains to our somatic nervous system, we have what I like to call highways or pathways in which information travels. Essentially, we have afferent pathways and efferent pathways. And we have another component that we'll make note of in between these two called a reflex arc, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. Now, those afferent pathways we mentioned are responsible for taking information that is received from our body through what we call somatic and or sensory receptors, and delivering that information up through our spinal cord into the brain for processing. And once the information traveling on this highway has been received by the brain, we get a response message that originates here and travels down the efferent pathway, leading to the initiation of a voluntary movement through what we call somatic effectors. Now, the other nervous system component that we'll review together is the autonomic nervous system. And the prefix of the word autonomic is auto. And when we see the term auto, we're likely to think of the term automatic. And that's what this component of the nervous system represents. It is the part of our nervous system that initiates automatic, or what we can call involuntary movements or control. And similar to what we saw with the somatic nervous system, the autonomic nervous system is also made up of both afferent and efferent pathways. Now, you'll notice that we're showcasing two different red lines here, and this will be used to indicate subdivisions of the autonomic nervous system that we'll give names to in just a moment. But within our autonomic nervous system, our afferent pathway will transmit information that is sensed by visceral receptors. And in case you're curious, the term visceral just simply indicates internal organs. So when our internal organs receive a stimulus, they communicate this information by transmitting a message up the spinal cord into the brain for processing. And once that information has been received and interpreted, it will elicit an involuntary response traveling down the efferent pathway to what we call autonomic effectors. And as I mentioned earlier, we have two red lines here to represent the subdivisions of the autonomic nervous system. The first one is what we call the sympathetic nervous system, also known as the fight or flight response, and the second is what we refer to as the parasympathetic nervous system, also known as the rest and repair system or the rest and digest system. So now that we have this schematic to help us understand the structure and organization of the nervous system, Let's expound on this further by including some examples to make better sense of it. So let's start with our somatic nervous system. The afferent pathway is initiated when somatic and/or sensory stimuli are triggered. For example, these stimuli could include smell, touch, taste, and hearing. So let's imagine that someone touches your hand. The ability for you to know that this happened is because of the sensory receptors within your skin. So those receptors take that message of being touched and transmit that information up the spinal cord via the afferent pathway to the brain for interpretation. And in this example, once that message is received and interpreted, your brain will formulate a voluntary response to that stimuli, which travels down this efferent pathway so that you can respond appropriately. Now, let's tackle one of the things that we haven't yet covered. We also mentioned that the somatic nervous system includes what we call a reflex arc. This reflex arc represents information that is sensed or noticed by our sensory receptors. And instead of that information being sent to the brain first, it travels up the spinal cord and is received by an interneuron. And the interneuron passes the information of the stimulus back towards the body to elicit a motor response. And in general, a reflex arc is protective in nature. For example, if you were to touch a hot stove, your hand moving away quickly is representative of that reflex arc. Additionally, the classic patellar tendon reflex test is also an example. For this, a healthcare professional takes a reflex hammer and gently taps over the patellar tendon. And what we see, considering that a normal result is present, is the leg kick out because of the quadriceps muscle contracting. So let's update our overall description of the somatic nervous system by saying that it regulates voluntary movements in addition to involuntary reflexes. Now let's take a look at the autonomic nervous system, and let's look specifically at what we can call the sympathetic nervous system. The afferent pathway here is activated when we encounter situations that induce stress, physical activity, and/or danger. So let's imagine that for a given situation, you perceive that you're in danger. Well, that information travels up the spinal cord along the afferent pathway to the brain where it is interpreted. And what's unique here is that our nervous system will partner, as it oftentimes does, with the endocrine system to release the hormones epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are jointly known as the fight or flight hormones. These hormones, in combination with the nervous system, send a response down this efferent pathway and lead to an effect on the glands and/or organs of the body. And as a result, you'd experience an increased heart rate, your respiration or breathing rate would increase, and your body would initiate a process known as glycogenolysis. And this is a process in which your body breaks down glycogen into glucose so that it can be utilized as a source of fuel or energy. So now let's provide an example for what we can call the parasympathetic nervous system. It too will become activated because of a stimulus to the afferent pathway. And in this example, let's imagine that you just finished eating a meal. Well, the sensory receptors within your digestive system will relay a message up your spinal cord along this afferent pathway to your brain that it's time to continue the digestion process of your food. Once that message is received by your brain, a response is formulated, and again, partnering with the endocrine system, there will be a release of the hormone insulin down this efferent pathway. And the job of insulin here is to help usher glucose or sugar into the cells so that ATP can be generated. And as a result, the body gives a great deal of attention towards completing the digestion process and slowing down other processes at the time. And so this is why you'd be likely to experience a decrease in your heart rate, in your breathing or respirations, but an increase in glycolysis, the process used to break down more complex carbohydrates into simple sugars. So overall, we can say that the autonomic nervous system is regulating involuntary processes within the body, those that the body does for us automatically without us having to think about initiating those processes. Well, thank you for watching this video. I hope it's been helpful, and I'll look forward to connecting with you again in the next video.